Jeffrey, we'll start with you and welcome again.
Thank you. Well, just to give you a very quick description of Red Clay Suzie. Red Clay Suzie is about a little boy named Philbert. And Philbert is fueled by tomato sandwiches and green milkshakes, and he is obsessed with cars. He is happiest when he is helping Granddaddy dig potatoes from the garden that separates their houses. And he is born in Warm Springs, Georgia, with a physical deformity, and he is gay. And I won't say more than that. I don't want to spoil it for you, but that in a nutshell is Red Clay Suzie. And I've selected a very brief passage to read to you to start us off this evening, and I'll give you a little bit of context before I read it. This is from the last third of the novel. And in this passage, Philbert has this fear of taking off his shirt in public, understandably, because he has a physical deformity, a skeletal deformity of the chest. And in this passage, Philbert, who longs for, idolizes an older boy named Knox, overcomes his fear of rejection by taking off his shirt. And one important point to make is that Knox has a nickname for Philbert, and that nickname is Keebler. "Let's go swimming," Knox said. I avoided swimming at all costs because that was a shirts-off activity. So I said, I don't swim. "Oh, I'll teach you," he said. "Oh, that's okay. Everyone needs to know how to swim." "I know how, I just don't." "Why not?" "Water gets in my ears," I said. "Well, earplugs, they don't really work." "Earplugs. Come on, Philbert, it's so hot." "Okay, you don't have to go in, but you're coming along. Let's go." And with that, he pulled me out the door by the hand, and then he guided me towards the woods, his hand on the small of my back. I followed him down a steep but not deep gully and into a mostly dried up creek bed. And then we turned and we were in the open, and the sun is suddenly making us squint after having been in the cool shade of the piney woods, in a beautiful dark green lake spread out with woods on all sides of it. He sat down on the bank and he started to pull his shoes off. "Let's go in." "No," I said way too abruptly. "Well, you don't have to put your head under." "No." "Well, okay." Before I lost my courage, I admitted, "I don't want to take my shirt off," thinking the only thing worse than telling him about my deformity was for him to think I was a total weirdo. "Oh, it's just, I never done that. And it's because of my Keebler. It's no problem." Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I took my shirt off, my chest fully exposed in the sunlight. And I just stood there. "See?" He didn't talk. He just stared at me. My teenage fantasy was looking at what I spent hour after hour trying to hide. "Say something," I thought. "Does it hurt?" "Only when you don't touch it," I thought, and said without saying, without thinking. "What?" "Nothing. Just forget it." I never felt more exposed than I was right then, my shirt off with my white, pasty, skinny, malformed bird chest in full view of the boy I loved. I didn't even know if he liked boys, much less freaky me. On the sun, it hurt so much because I couldn't hide. And the cavity in my chest is already smaller space than my heart needed to function. It just felt more compressed and restricted than usual. But I loved this moment as much as I hated it. I mean, it hurt so much. both the blood pumping heart in my chest and in my feeling heart, the one I wanted to give to him. Was I going to die right here in front of him? But if I didn't take this chance now, I never would. And if he didn't reject me after seeing my half-sunken chest, then I could trust him. I could believe anything that happened after that. And he just stared at me. But I could not look back. As embarrassing as it was, the pain was not because I was disfigured and all my organs were fighting for room. I ate because someone finally saw me.
Thank you so much for reading that, Jeffrey. That was beautiful. I'm so glad to be here with you. When you first reached out to me, I was like, I'm a nonfiction writer. I was like, I don't know. Okay, we'll see how this goes. But what I loved when I was reading this book is that I think, you and I share the experience of coming up queer in rural spaces and places where there were next to no or no models for what it meant to be who we were. And I think that's a thread that really ties both of our books together. And in the case of Clay Suzie, there's this underneath the title, there's this little thing that says a novel inspired by true events. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how your personal experiences coming up in Warm Springs informed the way you wrote this book.
Oh, I'm happy to. Well, yeah, it's, to use a literary term, it's a fictionalized memoir. And like the protagonist Philbert, I was, as we've said before, I was born gay with a skeletal deformity of the chest in Warm Springs, Georgia. And also, much like Philbert's family, mine was simply not equipped to guide and to shape the path of a child like me. It wasn't willful neglect. It was more parenting through, I would say, equal parts love and ignorance and fear, mostly fear. And but it was difficult, even under the best of circumstances. I knew from the earliest age that I was different on the inside and the outside. And I felt like I was always on the fringes. I call it on the fringes, looking in to this world that I didn't feel like I belonged in, and it just didn't square with what I felt deep down inside me, in my heart. And so here's an example. I don't want to give away too much, but here's an example of inspired by true events. Philbert's daddy, like my own, was shot in the head while trying to break up a domestic dispute. And in my case, it was at the filling station, the convenience store, which I always thought of as the excuse me, the Times Square of our small community, and sat just across the road from our house. And so while in Read Clay Suzie, I've changed the details of that horrific, horrible event. The core event's true. Yeah. And that's why I think of Read Clay Suzie as based in fact, but not bound by fact.
What made you make that choice? Right? You could have written a traditional memoir. The story is compelling in and of its own, right? Why did you decide to kind of go with this idea of like based in fact, but not bound by fact?
There were, I wrote it as a fictionalized memoir because I wanted to tell some stories and make some points and explore some parts of my life that I never lived. Because, I always felt I was conditioned to feel that I was conditioned to rejection, to just expect it, which made me very timid and afraid to make decisions. And there are characters in the book that did not exist in real life, or they did exist in real life, but we didn't have the same kind of interactions or relationship that exist in the book. So an example is there's a Philbit's best friend, James, is so James is wise and funny and plain spoken, and he is Black, and he lives in this world that lives in a world of conscious and unconscious racism. It's just a fact. And he is, Philbit's one true friend all the way from first grade through high school. And they are viewed as outsiders in this world. They share that. That's what binds them together. They're kindred spirits in that way. But the difference is that James sees the world in a very different way. He opens the door for Philbit to see the world as a more inclusive place. However, I did not have the friend of James as a child. There was a boy who was Black, and I thought he might be interested in being my friend, but I was too afraid to approach him. I was afraid of rejection. I was conditioned to think that he would not want to be my friend. And so writing this relationship in this book is a way of righting a wrong, a way of exploring a friendship that might have been had I been bold, less timid, and reached out and tried to make a connection with someone. So that's the reason I decided to fictionalize it, to explore those kinds of relationships and opportunities, to create a world that never existed for me.
Yeah. That makes me think a little bit about another relationship in the book that really stood out to me, which is the relationship between Philbit and his granddaddy, which was probably one of my favorite things about this book. Their interactions really gave me a lot of joy. And I wondered if you could talk about the inspiration for that relationship, and what you hope readers will take away from that relationship in the book.
I hope that also the inspiration for that was, of course, my grandfather, who was a gentle, lovely, kind man, and I always remember moments with him. And as I look back years later, I've come to realize that they were life lessons, that he was preparing me to live a life and to make decisions and to navigate a world in which he probably wouldn't be alive. And there's early in the book, there's an example of that that takes place in the garden that separates the two houses that they live in. And so Philbit loves to dig potatoes, because you never know what you're going to get when you dig a potato. And the same with carrots, they're under the ground, they grow under the ground unseen. And Granddaddy shares, the reason behind that, why some are a little more hardy than others, and why you never know what you're going to get, and that there's value. There's not just value, but there's beauty in imperfection, and that there is no such thing as perfection.
Right.
There's a reason for the differences, the diversity, the differences among us all. And so that's Granddaddy's influence on the book and me.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what was so beautiful is it's not even just that there are differences, but that actually the imperfections make something more valuable, right? Or make something better or stronger or more flavor. Like, I thought that was such a beautiful message to impart in such a lovely way. I really, really enjoyed that. I also really loved how rich the descriptions are in this book. Whether it's people or place or food or cars, there's a level of attention to detail that I think is pretty incredible. And we're talking about things that happened a while ago. And I wondered how you were able to kind of go back and bring those elements to life with such specificity. How did you get back into the story in such a way that allowed you to render it so clearly for those of us who weren't there?
I think part of the reason, or the I'm inspired by literature. I'm inspired by Southern writers. And when I read Southern literature, I'm always taken with how it transports me. It takes me there. I can see it and feel it and smell it and taste it. And so, I mean, I don't want to get too rhapsodic about Southern literature, but I'll try to. But you know, I love that Southern literature is so often populated with these quirky, enigmatic sort of people with these beautiful, delicious backstories, and I love the cadence, love the cadence of Southern dialogue, and you know, sort of it just drips with tree sap in it. The vowels are overlong in this almost Italianate, almost operatic way, and within all of that is such rich description. And being from the South, there are so many, you know, everyone's a storyteller. And being among storytellers growing up, almost when I think of telling a story, I think of being on the back porch, you know, with iced tea and tomato sandwiches, and listening to people and just taking in everything around. And so growing up in that environment, listening to people who tell stories, and feeling isolated almost all of my life, isolated to the point that I never is not the right word, that more often than not, I would not engage with other people. I would listen. And in that listening, I absorbed what was around me, and so many memories and so many flavors of the candy that, you know, I devoured growing up, and the cars that I loved and longed to ride in or drive myself. And the heat of the you know, hot as blazes Georgia heat. I mean, it just bakes itself into you. All of those things have just sort of baked themselves into me, and they spewed forth because it was such an emotional experience.
Yeah, I think that the pace of the book and the way that it's told, that feeling of sitting on porches, is very salient when you're reading, and it's a lovely experience to feel like we can take our time. This is a story where we can take our time. We don't have to rush, and we can really, really immerse ourselves in this place. It's a really lovely feeling. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the title. Because Suzie, when that name is first introduced in the book, is introduced as a slur or an insult.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about the decision to kind of take that and claim it and kind of put it forward as the title, and how you got there.
Well, of course, red clay is a reference to place, and I actually have some red clay.
Look at
This
that.
This is red clay. My parents and my older brother, they properly washed about 6 mayonnaise jars, washed them, dried them, and then filled them with red clay from the yard. And they sent them to me so that I would have them to show when I go to talk. And I wish that everyone were here, because if you have never touched or smelled or felt red clay, it is quite an experience. There's such an earthy, there's an earthiness to it that is only it's difficult to describe. I try to in the book, but it just, I've always thought that once you touch it, or once it touches you, it's on you forever. It stains you. It makes it marks you, claims you. And so that had to be part of the title, because it's been such an important part of my life. It is an indelible mark on me. So that's red clay. And of course, Suzie, I don't want to give away too much, but it is about identity as well, a different kind of identity, one that was unique to fewer people, unique to me, and people who were, you know, the fewer people who were like me. But red clay it makes it almost a universal story of the South, I think. You know, people can understand that. But the other part of it is within that within that common experience, the shared red clay, the shared world around us, there can be isolation. There can be we can feel alone.
Yeah.
Even with that, even with those common things that bind us together. And so that's what I was going for.
Yeah, like there's an expectation of homogeneity, right? That I think people have about the South or have about Appalachia and have about the people who live there that doesn't reflect who's there. And I think sometimes makes it harder for those folks to be there. So that
I think that's a universal story for all of us. I mean, no matter where we grew up, no matter where we find ourselves, and no matter where I live, the Deep South is in me at a molecular level. I'll always be a Southerner. I'll always be a Southern writer, no matter where I go or where I live. But everyone has that identity to their beginnings. But I think also everyone also feels a little isolated in some ways, even with that common binding part.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So I've heard that you wrote Red Clay Suzie in kind of a unique way. And I wondered if you'd talk to us about your writing process and then also your path to publishing this book, how you kind of made that journey.
Okay. Well, I wrote Red Clay Suzie. As it turns out, I started writing Red Clay Suzie, as it turns out, when I left home to go to LaGrange College in LaGrange, Georgia. And LaGrange College is a very small liberal arts institution. The best thing about LaGrange College in LaGrange, Georgia, when I was a teenager, was that it wasn't where I grew up. But what I found was that, as it turns out, why did I say that? Well, as it turns out, I didn't know I was writing a novel at the time. There were years of frustration and humiliation and confusion and anger pent up inside of me. But when I was gay, slight of build, effeminate. I had this skeletal deformity that I spent every waking moment and piece of energy I had trying to hide. And so from a very early age, 4 or 5, a young'un, we were called young'uns back then, I was a walking target of derision and bullying. But when I left home, it had the effect of, it was like a dam burst, and all these memories flooded out of me, white hot memories of my family, of childhood friends, all of whom played this, very formative role in my life to that point. And I started writing all of that down when I left to go to college. I call it an exorcism by exposition. So I journaled a lot, and that was very healing. It felt like a salve, on a wound, very, very comforting. That's how I started to write Red Clay Suzie. But of course, school got in the way, and I put those journals away, having every expectation that I would go back to it. But I didn't go back for several decades. And so fast forward to Washington, D.C., I read Call Me By Your Name, and I reread To Kill a Mockingbird, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And it's the power of literature for me. Something inside just broke open, and I started writing again. I pulled out those journals, I reread them several times, and I started, getting to answer your question, I started typing on my iPhone on the train going to and from my work at the Library of Congress. And that's how I finished writing Red Clay Suzie. And I didn't tell anybody until I had a full first draft. I told my partner over breakfast one morning, I wrote a novel, and he almost spat out his coffee in disbelief. So there's a memory I'll always treasure.
Amazing. And so then there's always obviously like the writing of the novel, but then there's also the process of publishing a novel, which can be hard.
Yeah.
It can be a challenging experience. So yeah, what did that part look like for you?
So I didn't write the book for anyone but me to begin with. I didn't think of it as anything but sort of it was healing catharsis for me. And I didn't really think about it until I was about halfway through the first draft about even sharing it with anybody else to read.
Mm-hmm.
So I took baby steps towards it. I found first readers, of course, to get some feedback to, as one does. And then I started looking for an agent. And so that was another step towards sharing it with the world. I actually sent it to a couple of people through very tangential connections. And I sent it to several people to get feedback on the query letter. And one of those people was an acquisitions editor at an independent publisher. And the feedback was, oh yeah, it's a great query letter, but I would like to publish it.
Okay.
So that was a great response. But in the meantime, I actually got a literary agent who has championed the book. And but as it turns out, that publisher did publish the book. It's called Post Hill Press, a small independent publisher. And they're known mostly for their nonfiction catalog, and also by publishing titles by conservatives, arch conservatives, people much like my parents. And so when that happened, I actually, my agent and I asked the question, explain this. Can you explain why you're interested in this book? Because it doesn't seem to fit your catalog of, what you typically print, publish. And the acquisitions editor said that, she and Post Hill Press were interested in expanding the fiction side of their catalog and diversifying the voices that they publish. And I really was excited to be part of that. I love being on the vanguard. I love that. I love being part of that laudable effort. And so I reasoned it this way, that my story, Philbit's story, is, one might say it's a political story. I think it's more a human story. And if publishing with an unexpected publisher means that someone who might otherwise give my book a pass and not look at it would look at it, I call that a win, because it means that that's one more queer kid who'll be better off.
That's right.
And that's my unusual path to publishing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are queer people everywhere, and there are queer people in every kind of family with every kind of political background, right? And so the idea that we would shut ourselves off and say, well, we're not going to publish here, we're not going to publish there. There's a whole bunch of people get excluded if we operate that way. So I think, I appreciate that.
Actually, my summary statement, if I have one, is that you don't create change by shutting yourself off from conversations with people who have different opinions than you. You sort of head in, you have conversations, you confront and you conquer. And I was excited to take this unusual and unexpected path to publishing.
Yeah. I can really appreciate that sentiment. I feel like it's rarer and rarer to hear from people in our country right now, because polarization is such a strategy of so many politicians. The idea that you could be in relationship with people who have different beliefs than you is something I think if you grow up in the South, very well, but it feels more and more uncommon right now. So I appreciate hearing you say that. So the author's note at the beginning of the book talks about bullying and body shaming, which are both things that Philbit experiences in the context of the book. I don't think that's a spoiler necessarily. But it does feel like in a lot of ways, this is a book that operates on two levels. Like it operates on the level of being something that an adult can read, but it also very much operates on the level of being something that has young adults at its heart. And so I wondered about the message that you're kind of trying to send to young adults through the writing of this book, particularly young adults who feel marginalized.
Well, I've mentioned that I've really started writing it, excuse me, for myself to heal. And, I was halfway through before I even thought about it really as anything to be as a roadmap for others. So I didn't think of it as that. I didn't think of it as any sort of message of hard fought self-acceptance achieved through a childhood of bullying and body blow rejection in the beginning. But it came to me about halfway through. There were no books like this when I was growing up. There were no, at least they weren't on the bookmobile that appeared magically across the road at the filling station convenience store. And so I came to think of it as just that, a roadmap for my fellow fringies, as I've come to think of them, people who are having a horribly rough time of it now, as I did when I was a child. I mean, the statistics are staggering.
Yeah.
It's 21% of LGBTQ kids attempt suicide.
No.
And that's compared to 7% of their straight peers. Bullying, it's a third of all queer kids, report being bullied. And it's even worse when you think of when you add in cyberbullying. It's relentless. And so that's why I decided that I wanted this to be, I hope, a roadmap, a story of affirmation. And I think actually it's better. One of the best reactions I received was from Pete Cross. He's such a beautifully talented voice actor, and he narrated the audio version of Clay Suzie. And he said after he recorded it, we talked several times, and he said it's such a tender story. I wish I had had this book when I was growing up. That's the highest praise I could get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot about the fact that, when we were growing up, there was certainly bullying, but there was also a lot of silence around queerness. And that silence has now been replaced by such vocal vitriol. I think it is, I think in some ways it might be easier for a young person now to figure out who they are because there's more visibility, but it's also so much harder because you're figuring out who you are in a context where in the places where we grew up, politicians are actively passing legislation that's like directly designed to eradicate us. And so in that context, I think narrative becomes so important because narrative is like the only thing you have. It's the place where you can see yourself and feel validated and feel like you're going to be okay. And it's so important. I think that young people in places like Warm Springs, Georgia, have access to this book. You are donating a portion of your proceeds from this book to organizations that help at-risk youth. Would you be willing to talk about that?
Oh, I'd love to. So I've long been a fan of the work that two organizations, and so many do, but two organizations that I've selected, they are doing the hard work every day. And one is the Born This Way Foundation, which is was founded by Lady Gaga and her mother, Cynthia Germanata, and they help at-risk youth live their best lives, their best, richest, fullest lives. And the Trevor Project offers a national suicide hotline for LGBTQ youth. And I decided that I wanted to support that work. And so part of the proceeds of Clay Suzie, sale of Clay Suzie, go to support that important work.
That's awesome. Sort of works on two levels, right? Supporting the young people who are reading the book through the reading of the book, and then also supporting them on that level as well. So the book's been in the world for a couple of weeks now. How have readers been reacting to it? And maybe talk us through like all the different sets, friends and family, but also new readers, people who you didn't know before you published the book. You've been doing readings. I'd love to hear about how that's all been going.
Oh, it's been the last several weeks have been, everything is new. Being a first time published author, going on these kinds of talks, both virtually and in person. I've loved every moment of it. There are a couple of moments that stand out as highlights, though. So let's first start with my family. So
Well, they sent you the clay, so it seems like
they did.
that's something.
Yeah, my family has responded so warmly, and so they're so supportive about it. And it's I wondered how they would, how they'd receive it, because it is a fictionalized memoir, but I knew that they would look for the parts of our lives that really do, that they see in the book. But what's been so surprising is that they have turned this into a kind of parlor game. They have taken, so I was in Georgia a couple of times in the last several weeks, and when I first arrived, they had taken a sheet of paper and written down the names of the characters, the main characters, the cameo appearance characters in the book, and they had out to the side listed the names of real people that they believe inspired those characters. And and did we get it right? Is this right? And so in some cases, of course, the character is made of whole cloth, but they have a real person's name beside. So I won't confirm or deny any of that.
No, definitely not.
But they have. But the other comments have been, and I've gotten calls and texts, and I've seen people in person, family members in person. We had no idea that you had such a hard, difficult time of it. We didn't understand. We should have paid attention more. And so they've really rallied around me, and that's been a beautiful experience, wonderful experience. My friends, I had, of course, I trusted some friends who are also writers to be first readers, and those people and friends who have read it since it's come out, I think, have come to know me and appreciate who I am in a way that they never would have come to know and appreciate just through interactions. They know another side of me now that only the literature could help them see. But there was one instance, I went back to LaGrange College, my alma mater, to do a talk, and there was a young man who, and I didn't have my glasses on, so I really couldn't see that well, that far into the audience. But he raised his hand at the Q&A and he said, I have a physical skeletal condition similar to yours. And when I was 19 or 20, I could have never admitted that. And for him to admit that in a room full of people, peers, his teachers, the faculty, it just made me feel like the book had done what I hoped it would do, is start conversation and normalize being different, make it okay to be different.
Yeah.
And so that was a very special moment. And then I've met so many people in the writing community, reading community, who have, sent messages, and I've had conversations, in person and online. So I feel that my world has opened up tremendously, meeting authors whose work I've read and have admired. Talking to you, it's someone who with whom I feel we share quite a bit of similarities, similar past experiences. So I feel that the world is just richer and more open, and a more inclusive place because of this.
Yeah, I think I would say that that's been my experience as well, as feeling a kind of connection to people that I didn't necessarily anticipate was going to happen. And it sounds like that's kind of what's happened for you too.
I remember, you mentioned your family's reaction to some of your writing, and relating that to a cousin who has sort of explored, who has a different approach to communicating with the world. And what you said resonated so much with me. I had a very different experience, but I certainly understood the concern and the fear ahead of time as well.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. It's been so lovely talking to you. I want to make sure we leave time for audience questions because I'm sure there are folks who are dying to ask you a bunch of things.
Thank you, Neema.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have some questions. I first just want to start by thanking the both of you. Jeffrey, thank you for the wonderful reading, and Neema, thank you for the great questions. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I know I've been enjoying it, as have the members of our at-home audience. The first question that popped up was actually about whether or not your parents had read the book, Jeffrey, and how they responded to it. So, Neema, you took care of that for us.
I can say one thing that
yeah, please do add. Yeah.
So this was before my parents read the book. And this is when I actually traveled to Georgia to tell my parents that I had written a book. And I didn't tell them until I signed the publishing deal because, you can't get out of that. That's a binding contract. So my father was in his reclining chair in front of the television, and there's a post next to the chair, oddly enough. And he had his hand on it. And so he was sitting there watching television with his hand on the post. And I said, Daddy, I have some news. And he said, uh-huh. And he never looked at me. I wrote a book. I wrote a novel. You wrote a what? I wrote a novel. Is it hardback? that was important to him. So I thought it was so funny. Before you
love that. Yeah. And I'll just, since you mentioned that, which I love, I'm just going to go ahead and comment on how beautiful the book is. And the publisher, I mean, you talked so well about, how ostensibly perhaps the publisher mismatched the publisher might have been, right? But they did very well by you in the production of the book. And that doesn't always happen. That is not guaranteed. And I don't know if you have anything to share about the design of it. We talk a lot about how you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but people do. So yeah.
They do. So Nicole Caputo is a beautifully gifted, talented, brilliant designer, and she is responsible for this beautiful cover.
It's gorgeous.
And the publisher, Deborah Englander, is the acquisitions editor, and I dealt mostly with her. Always, listened and was a partner in this process. It was. Who can argue?
You really can't. I mean, it is lovely. And there are so many books out there, right? And so there is something to be said for ones that call your attention and do it in a way that you've used the word inclusive several times this evening, that is inclusive in that cover doesn't say, here's the reader who I'm for, right? There are lots of books that are marketed in where the covers are really this sort of out there marketing that screams like, I am for your book club of people in this specific demographic who read this, like that happens in publishing. And that book is just, it's that cover. I am being totally honest when I mentioned that we were talking about this the other day, booksellers in the store, we were like, this is great because it doesn't scream to you, if you are a white man under 40, don't read this book. Or if you are, right. Or if you're straight, don't read this book. Or if you're, married with 3 children, don't read this book, or do read this book, or right. Sometimes they kind of do that. And it doesn't do that. And it's also just beautiful. So sorry for my aside there about these are the conversations booksellers have a lot. Because sometimes some of our favorite books are disserved by their covers in that way, in one way or another. It's a peeve of ours. And I'll say the same thing about your book, Neema, the cover of your book, because it speaks to what you're talking about, but doesn't say to anybody, this book isn't for you, right? Which I appreciated as well. So now to the next question. Eric Parker, who hi Eric, says, is the character of Bo based on a real person? He's such a wonderful presence in Philbitt's life.
He is based on a real person, and an older boy from when I was a child who was very kind to me and went to Vietnam. I don't want to say much more than that, but
No
the
spoilers.
character of Bo in the book I didn't intend for that to. I didn't initially think of that character as having such a large role, but as I wrote the book and the characters developed, it just he just sort of happened, evolved and became a really important force in the life of this child.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question is really more of a comment, but it's a wonderful one. Hi, Jeffrey. I love the way Philbit's narration wanders around like kudzu. Also just had a conversation about kudzu recently, because we hosted an event for another book called The Kudzu Queen, and I pronounced it kudzu because I spent a little time in Japan and that's what came out. And I actually I'm from Florida originally, and my mother's also from Kentucky. So I am Southern, but didn't say kudzu. And so we had a whole conversation about that. So kudzu or kudzu. So Philbit's narration wanders around like kudzu, and before you know it, you're wrapped up in it.
Oh,
This is from MR, who says, I'm really enjoying this book. So
oh, great. Yeah, well, the pace of the book. So the pace of the book is, I structured the book to play out the way that I imagined, or not imagined, but see a life playing out. When young, days go on forever. Summers go on for years. And so there's a very languid sort of on the back porch or front porch sort of storytelling feel to the book while Philbit is a child. And then it picks up pace as we get to the middle of the book, and then it just barrels towards the end, as life seems to do as we get older. You realize, oh, life's end. We don't live forever, and the days are shorter. They come faster and faster and faster. So that was how I intended for this to be read. Sort of sit back with a glass of iced tea on a hot day and just, enjoy your time reading and spend as much time as you want, sort of a languid afternoon, and then barrel to the finish.
Yeah. I love that, barrel to the finish.
Yeah. Can't stop it.
Yeah, that's great. Neema, I know you as well, both of you are embracing where you're from, right? While also sort of interrogating what that means and what it so often seems to mean to other people who aren't from there, right? So who aren't from the South, aren't from Appalachia. And I love that means not fighting against the sort of like reality of moving slower sometimes because it's hot, and drinking lots of iced tea, and like, being like, yes, that's a stereotype that is all like sweet tea is, stereotype us as sweet tea drinkers. That's fine. Right. But at the same time, kind of, unwrapping so much of the stuff that's assumed, and painting different pictures about things. So, and I think you both do that. So just wanted to point that out and say thank you both for that. One more question from Eric, and then I just have one final question. And do you want to talk about whether or not you're doing any book festivals, Jeffrey?
Yes, I think I can announce a few of them. I'm very excited. I'm going to be at Greensboro Bound in North Carolina. And I'll also be at are you going to be there, Neema? Oh my gosh.
Excellent. Putting in a link to Greensboro Bound now for folks. Check it out, y'all.
Great. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And I'll be at the San Antonio Book Festival and Virginia. Oh, I'm going to mess up the title. It's the Virginia Festival of the Book. I think that's what it's called, in Charlottesville.
Excellent.
So the one so far. And I can't wait to see Neema in Greensboro.
That'll be great. And are those on your website, Jeffrey? put a link into your website, Sue.
Yes, I have an events
Okay.
page and everything is on there. I think that I haven't put all of the festivals because I wasn't sure that it was okay, but I've mentioned them now, so I can.
Okay.
I'm sure
So-
it's fine,
All
but
right.
they'll be on there shortly.
Excellent. So my final question, and Neema, I'm going to start with you, actually. I just wanted to ask what you're working on now, or what you're working on next, if there's anything you can share with us.
So my partner and I just had a baby 2 months ago.
Congratulations.
So I feel like I don't even remember what words are.
Sure.
But I have a bunch of things that are like in my notes app that I sort of take notes on while I'm walking or half asleep, that are around unlearning, unlearning a lot of things that we're taught about motherhood, about sort of what it means to work, just sort of like essays that really interrogate like these roles that we take as we grow up and what we're taught about them. And then what happens when you start to ask yourself the question, like, is this how I want to do this thing? So stay tuned. It's messy right now, but hopefully it'll be in a better place in 40 years or so. We'll be there
after you've sent the child through college, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, congratulations. Again, looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, another Appalachia is a really wonderful book to read, and I'm sure the next one will be as well whenever it comes out. And Jeffrey, what about you? Anything you would like to share?
Well, I'm working on the sequel to Red Clay Suzie. I think this book is a foundation, setting the foundation to a couple of Red Clay novels. So I've got that. And I have another idea that I've started to work on, but I'm not prepared to really share much about that yet.
That's okay. I know that question doesn't always get an answer, and that's fine.
So Red Clay, I'll say Red Clay Filbert. That's what I'm working on right now, Red Clay Filbert.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you both so much again. Jeffrey, congratulations on your book on Red Clay Suzie, and Neema, thank you for being with us again. And it's just been a delightful hour. I'm so appreciative of everyone who's been with us, and if you're just watching the video later, thank you for joining in, and for maybe helping spread the word about the work of both of these wonderful writers. And I will just end by inviting both of you to share any final thoughts you have. And again, we'll start with Neema and then give Jeffrey the last word, as it were.
Thank you both just for having me. It was really lovely to be here with you. And I think stories like Jeffrey's are always important, but particularly important in this moment when there are a lot of very vocal people who are hell-bent on making life harder for LGBTQ folks in this country. And so just the more you can do to lift up his story, and to get it to young people and to get it to people who you think really could use it, the better, because it needs to be in the world right now.
Thanks.
Thank you, Neema. First, I want to say thank you, Neema, for being here. When I read your book, I felt such a connection to you because I think we have similar experiences, but I think we're not unique. There are a lot of people like us in the world, and I think it's important for us all to sort of share with each other so that we don't feel so alone. And I want to thank you, Stephanie and Malaprops, for having me. I think it's important for stories like ours to be told. So one of my greatest hopes is for every public library to carry a copy of Red Clay Suzie and another Appalachia. So because so many young people don't have the resources to buy them. Exactly. I love independent bookstores, but access is really what's important. And so go to your local public library and encourage them to carry books like these. And I think that if I could share one final message for fellow Fringies, is that bullies are paper predators who have no more power over you than you yourself give them. They are afraid of the world, more afraid than you are probably. I would say to fellow Fringies that your bodies, however imperfect, real or perceived they are. Please care for them, love them, treat them with kindness so that they take you as far as they're able. I would say it is the quality of your hearts and minds that is most important. And finally, I would say, probably most important, that love, true love, is never wrong, and bravely bestow it on whomever is worthy of that gift. That's what I wish I had known when I was growing up. And if I could go back and whisper it into the ear of my younger self, that's what I'd say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. That was beautiful. Thank you, everyone. Yes, take that into the world. We'll all be better off. Thank you both so much again. And to everyone else, we hope to see you again at another event in some form or fashion. And meanwhile, please stay safe and well. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.